I never believed in haunted objects. Those TV shows with possessed dolls or cursed mirrors always felt contrived, like they were stretching for drama. I'm a freelance photographer and part-time estate sale flipper. I buy old, vintage pieces from abandoned homes, refurbish them, and resell them online. It's a quiet job that lets me work alone, which suits me. In April of last year, I attended an estate sale in the small town of Wexley, about 40 minutes from my home. Wexley was a dying place, half the houses boarded up, most of the businesses long gone. The flyer was vague. Estate of Ms. Eleanor Voss. Furniture, books, antique curios. Everything must go. It was the word curios that caught my eye. Those sometimes fetch ridiculous prices from niche collectors. The house was an old Victorian, black with age, smothered in ivy, with shutters that clung to the windows like crooked eyelids. There was no signage, no other cars parked out front. I almost thought I had the wrong address. But when I knocked, a gaunt, gray-haired woman opened the door without a word. Her face was lined like old bark, and her eyes, small, milky blue, locked on mine too long before she stepped aside. I remember the smell. The air inside was thick with dust, would rot, and something like dried flowers left too long in stagnant water. It wasn't warm, not cold either. It felt off. Still, I've seen worse. Everything's in the parlor, the woman rasped. Take what you want. Just don't open anything that's closed. She walked away before I could ask what that meant. The parlor was full of beautiful junk, porcelain figurines, a carved oak bookshelf, an old phonograph that looked like it hadn't worked since the 30s. Then, sitting crookedly on the mantel, was a music box. Not just any kind, either. This one was clearly handmade. The wood was dark mahogany, worn smooth around the edges. Delicate carvings of what looked like vines or maybe worms wove around the sides, tangled and spiraling. What stood out most was the crank. It was long, metal, and bent slightly like it had been twisted too hard. No keyhole, no wind-up compartment, just the crank. I lifted it, and I swear I heard something shift inside, something that wasn't a mechanism. I turned it slightly, and it groaned. Not a musical tone, not the expected twinkling chimes. A groan, like something waking up from underwater. And then silence. I turned the crank back the other way, slower this time. The groan was followed by a click. Then a low, scraping note like a violin bow drawn too hard across dry strings. It ended as quickly as it began. Don't turn that anymore, the woman said behind me, her voice sharp and close. I hadn't heard her approach. Is it broken? I asked. She shook her head once. It's not supposed to play. I laughed awkwardly. That's kind of the point of a music box, isn't it? She didn't laugh. She stared at me. That one doesn't play music. Not anymore. It hasn't since my sister died. The air in the room changed. My skin prickled. How much? I asked. She hesitated, then gave a tired sigh. Take it. Just don't keep it in your bedroom. I should have left the damn thing in the trunk. After leaving the Voss house, I drove back to my apartment, an old industrial loft on the edge of the city, where freight trains pass at night like ghosts dragging chains. I had no intention of keeping the music box for myself. I figured I'd clean it up, photograph it, and sell it to some collector of oddities. But I couldn't stop thinking about what the woman said. That one doesn't play music. Not anymore. It hasn't since my sister died. That night, I placed it on a work table in my small back room where I kept my gear, paints, and restorations. I set up a few soft lights and took photos from every angle. When I zoomed in on the carvings, I noticed they weren't vines. Not exactly. They twisted like tendrils, but some had teeth, tiny rows of sharp notches hidden in the whorls of the woodwork. Others looked like open mouths, screaming. I thought maybe I was tired. I went to bed around midnight. The freight train rolled by at 12:35, as usual. I remember watching the ceiling glow and dim as it passed. Then, at 1:14 a.m., I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was the train again. But it wasn't rhythmic. That it was irregular, almost wet. Skrrrch. Skrrrch. Click. I sat up in bed. It was coming from the back room. The air in my apartment had a different texture to it, thick like syrup. I got up and walked barefoot across the cold floorboards. The hallway to the back room stretched longer than I remembered. My vision felt slightly off, like something was pulsing just outside the edge of my sight. I pushed the door open. The light I'd left on was flickering. The music box was sitting exactly where I left it, only now the crank had moved. It was pointing straight up, and it was turning, slowly, clockwise, all on its own. The box let out a groan, long and low like metal dragging across cement, and then a note. Just one dot high, sharp and wrong. It screeched like a child screaming through a clarinet. It made my teeth itch. The sound died out, and the crank stopped. I couldn't move, not at first. Then I backed away and shut the door. I didn't sleep. The next day, I chalked it up to a mix of fatigue and maybe some sort of mechanical wind inside the box. Sometimes gears can shift under tension, right? Still, I avoided the room that day. But at 2:43 a.m., it happened again. I woke to the same sound. Skrrrch. Skrrrch. Click. Then the groan. Then the screech. I lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to move. It played 3 notes this time, each more warped than the last. And then something changed. I didn't hear the music anymore. I heard breathing. Not mine, not my neighbor's, not a heater or vent. It was hoarse, rattling, like something with a collapsed lung trying to inhale through syrup. The sound came from just outside my bedroom door. I shut my eyes tight and waited for the sun. By the 3rd night, I knew I couldn't just ignore it. I packed the box into an old towel, threw it into a plastic bin, and drove out to the edge of the city. I found a dumpster behind a burnt-out gas station and tossed it in. By the time I got home, I felt lighter, relieved. But that night, at 3:11 a.m., I woke to find a music box sitting on my kitchen counter. No towel, no bin. It looked wet. I threw up in the sink. I contacted a friend of mine, Jamie, who worked as a sound engineer and dabbled in field recording. I didn't tell him everything. Just said I had a weird antique that made strange sounds and I needed him to analyze it. He came over the next day with equipment. When I showed him the box, he frowned. Looks handmade. This thing's ancient. Can you record it? Analyze the sound. He set up a mic and motioned for me to turn it. I hesitated. After a pause, I reached out and turned the crank 1 full rotation. At first, nothing. Then it screamed. It wasn't a musical tone. Not remotely. The sound that came out was jagged, shrill, and inhuman. Like someone dragging fingernails across piano strings underwater. Jamie ripped his headphones off. Jesus Christ. What the hell is that? He played it back, isolating frequencies. But something strange happened. On the recording, the sound was different, quieter, layered. There was a voice underneath the screeching. Several. Actually, whispers overlapping and echoing like they'd been recorded in a vast chamber. One phrase repeated again and again, buried beneath the distortion. Open the lid. Open the lid. Open the lid. The lid didn't open. There was no seam, no clasp, no hinges. Just wood. Until that night, I was watching TV, half drunk on box wine, trying to ignore the anxiety twisting in my gut. Around 2:12 a.m., I heard something from the back room. Click. I froze. I crept to the room. The light I'd left on was off, but the music box was glowing. Faintly, a sickly amber color bled out from the seams where there had previously been none, and the lid, flush with the surface just yesterday, was now clearly defined. A perfect seam. A small, delicate keyhole had formed near the front. I hadn't seen it before, that I was certain it hadn't been there. I backed away and shut the door. I slept in my bathtub with the shower curtain closed. The next day, Jamie called. He sounded strange. Hey, man. Can you come over? What's up? I kept analyzing that recording. I isolated another channel. There's something you need to hear. Something I didn't notice before. I drove to his place. When I got there, his apartment was cold. Colder than outside. The thermostat was blinking erratically, 38 degrees Fahrenheit indoors. Jamie was pacing that he looked like he hadn't slept. He led me to his studio. On his screen was a spectrogram, a visual representation of the sound from the music box. But the patterns weren't random. They formed an image. A face. No, not a normal one that the mouth was open too wide. The eyes were gone. Its head was bent at an angle that would have snapped a spine. I think it's a scream, Jamie said. I think it's the shape of a scream. I didn't respond. Then he played the audio again. Slowed down. The voices were clearer this time. Let me out. Let me out. It hurts. It hurts. Open the lid. I left without saying goodbye. That night, I nailed the back room door shut. I slept with every light on. And at 3:03 a.m., I heard the nails groan and pop free. One by one, the door creaked open, and from the darkness, the box began to turn. After the door opened and the music box played again, I didn't sleep for 3 days. Not properly. I'd pass out from exhaustion for maybe an hour or two, always waking in cold sweat. Sometimes I heard the box, even when I wasn't near it. I'd be in the bathroom or the kitchen, and I'd hear the slow skrrrch of the crank turning. Always just faint enough to question if it was real. Sometimes I'd hear it whisper my name. Other times, it would laugh. Not out loud, not fully, just beneath the sound. Hidden, like the last layer of something rotting. That's when I started remembering something I'd forgotten. My grandmother. Her name was Ruth, my mom's mother. She lived with us briefly when I was very young. I couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, but I remembered her soft voice, her long gray hair, and the scent of lavender she carried with her like armor. I remembered she used to tell me stories at night, ones my mother would get angry about. I remembered, too, that she always double-locked every door. Not just the front and back doors, every door. Bedroom, bathroom, closets, and every night before bed, she would whisper something and blow across the hallway. I never thought about it much as I got older. Most of that time felt dreamlike, buried under years of school, jobs, girlfriends, breakups, and unpaid bills. But the night after the music box opened a visible seam, I dreamed of her. She was standing in the hallway of my childhood home, her back to me. Her head was tilted slightly, like she was listening to something behind the walls. In the dream, I called out to her. She turned, and her eyes were gone. In their place were two thin cranks. Turning, slowly, I called my mom the next morning. It took some effort. We hadn't spoken in months. The last time, we fought about her selling off my dad's vinyl collection without telling me. But when she answered and I asked about Grandma Ruth, there was a long silence. I was wondering when you'd remember her, she said flatly. What does that mean? I mean, she never left anything behind. No pictures, no journals, no record of her ever existing. But you did live with her for almost a year. I was just a kid. She tried to warn me, my mother said. She told me some things. Some things are passed down, not through blood, through contact. I didn't know what to say. Do you remember why she left? I shook my head, forgetting she couldn't see me. She didn't, my mother whispered. One day, I came home, and she was just gone. No note. Her clothes were still in the closet. Her cup was still full of tea. The back door was open, but no one saw her leave. My throat felt tight. Did she ever? How the music box? My mother went dead silent again. Where did you get it? She asked. Estate sale. Some place in Wexley. That's impossible, she said immediately. We burned it. We burned it, James. That night I slept in my car. I parked under a highway overpass and locked every door. I didn't care if it made me look homeless. I just needed space from that apartment. At 3:07 a.m., I woke up choking. Something was in my mouth. I scrambled for the door, coughing violently, and spit onto the concrete. It was a splinter of wood, tiny, carved, soaked in something metallic. I sat there, shaking, staring at my rearview mirror. Behind me, in the back seat, the music box was sitting upright. I hadn't brought it with me. I couldn't go to the police. What would I tell them? That a haunted antique was following me? That it crawled into my back seat? I had only one option left. Go back to Wexley. I returned to the estate house 2 days later. It looked worse than before, like it had aged a decade in just a few weeks. The shutters hung limp, the roof sagged, and ivy had overtaken almost the entire front porch. I knocked, and no answer. I tried knob locked. I walked around back and saw a storm cellar half buried in weeds. I opened it, descended into the dark, and found myself in the basement of the Voss house. The air smelled like wet bones. The stairs creaked as I climbed up into the main floor. The parlor was empty. All the antiques were gone, the shelves barren. Dust lay thick and undisturbed. But then I heard a noise upstairs, a shuffle without a breath. I called out. No answer. I climbed. The second floor was darker than it should have been. The windows were covered. The hallway was lined with doors, each one shut tightly. Only one was open at the end. A bedroom. I stepped in slowly. The bed was made perfectly. The walls were covered in yellowing wallpaper. And on the vanity table was a second music box, identical to mine, and beside it a photograph, faded, old. It showed two girls, twins, maybe 10 or 11 years old, sitting on a bench, holding music boxes in their laps. Carved wood, identical. The caption read, Eleanor and Ruth, 1936. I froze. Ruth, my grandmother. This was her house, or her sister's. A creaking sound behind me made me turn. A closet door, shaking, not violently, just barely, like something trapped inside was shifting against the wood. Tap, tap, tap. I backed out and ran. Back home, I pulled out the music box and examined every inch. And finally, I found it. On the bottom, beneath years of grime and dirt, was a tiny engraving. One word. Ruth. I spent the next few days researching everything I could find about the Voss family. Town records, archives. Wexley didn't have much, but I dug up a few things. Eleanor Voss was institutionalized in 1943. Diagnosis: paranoid psychosis with episodes of hysteria relating to objects and sound. Her sister, Ruth Voss, had no official death record. Multiple articles from 1942 referenced the screaming box of Wexley. Most were local rumors, children whispering about a box that made animals bleed from the ears, or about a tune that could drive you mad if you heard to the end. One article, yellowed and half-burned, read, "Twins Eleanor and Ruth were gifted handcrafted music boxes by their grandfather, a watchmaker. Both began reporting nightmares, seizures, and strange visitors at night, described as things with eyes inside out. Eleanor survived. Ruth vanished. I brought the box to a local antique specialist, hoping for insight. He lasted 2 minutes with it. He didn't even touch it, just stared at the carvings, pale-faced, and said, 'This isn't music. It's notation for pain.' He refused to tell me more. When I got home that night, the lid was fully open. Inside was black velvet, and on it a human tooth, still bleeding. It wasn't just a tooth. It was a child's molar, still slick with something wet and red, though I hadn't opened the box in days. I stood frozen in my kitchen, staring down into that black velvet-lined cavity. It was deeper than it should have been. I tried to shine a flashlight into it, and the beam didn't reach the bottom. It vanished into darkness, like the light itself refused to enter. The smell was what finally broke me. It reeked of burned hair. I slammed the lid shut. That night, I went to a hotel on the other side of town. I didn't take the box with me. I left it behind, locked in a steel toolbox with 3 padlocks and a thick canvas wrap tucked under my bed. But I still heard it. Around 3 a.m., I was brushing my teeth in the hotel bathroom when the mirror flickered just for a second. The lights buzzed, and I saw it, the box sitting on the counter behind me. When I spun around, it wasn't there, but I felt something in my mouth. I reached in and pulled out another tooth. My own. I woke up in the emergency room. I'd fainted in the hotel and had apparently been unresponsive for several hours. The doctor said I was exhibiting symptoms of acute stress-induced trauma. He asked if I had any history of mental illness. I didn't answer. I knew what he saw when he looked at me. A man on the edge. Pale, sunken eyes, no sleep, bleeding gums, and the smell of rot clinging to my skin like a second layer. I knew because I smelled it too. I couldn't wash it off anymore. The stink of burned hair, old blood, wet wood. It followed me now, even in the daylight. When I got back to my apartment, the box was on the kitchen table. Unwrapped, unlocked, open, and now. It wasn't empty. Inside, where the tooth had been, was something new, a length of tightly curled wire, wrapped around a sliver of parchment with something scratched into it with what looked like fingernail gouges. It read, "Finish the tune, or it keeps playing you." I finally contacted Jamie again, the sound engineer who had helped me analyze the audio weeks ago. I hadn't heard from him since our last meeting. He hadn't returned my calls or texts. When I arrived at his apartment, the building manager said he hadn't left his unit in 12 days. The place smelled awful. I found him inside, curled into the fetal position under a blanket, with all the windows blacked out and aluminum foil taped to the vents. His laptop was opened up. I saw hundreds of files, audio samples of the box, stretched and altered in every imaginable way. Each one labeled obsessively. Box tune 47 time-lapse ear bleed. Box tune 92 reverse whispers. Box tune 203 11 voices. Box tune final decoded fragment. He had gone too far. His fingers were blackened at the tips. One was broken. He looked at me with sunken eyes and said, "It's not a song. It's a lock. And every time you play it, it opens a little more." Opens what, Jamie? The thing that screams. He said that during his audio analysis, the sound patterns changed the longer you listened. It wasn't just distortion, it was a blueprint. Whatever's in the box. It wants to finish the song, but it can't. It needs someone outside to complete it. That's what it's always wanted. That's what it's always done. I returned home and did something I'd avoided for weeks. I sat down, pulled on gloves, and turned the crank all the way. Not one rotation, not two. I turned it 33 times until I felt it seize. And the tune played. All of it. It started as usual. The low moan of grinding wood and warped metal, the high-pitched whine that could have passed for a child's scream. Then the melody took shape. It wasn't music, not in any traditional sense. The sequence of notes violated logic. Timing shifted. Tones collapsed in on themselves. There were rhythms that should have been impossible to reproduce without human lungs or an ancient instrument. It sounded like something being tortured into music. My ears bled. My nose started running, not with mucus, but something darker like ink. Halfway through, I felt something shift in the air. The temperature dropped rapidly. Frost formed on my walls, creeping across like fingers dragging through condensation. The lights exploded, all of them point one by one. And then a presence entered the room. Not seen, not heard, felt. Like gravity had suddenly chosen me as its anchor point. I felt on my knees that my breath crystallized. The box vibrated, and the lid blew open on its own. From inside came a sound I cannot fully describe. It wasn't a scream. It was the absence of one, a vacuum where a voice had once been, but was now hollowed out by centuries of suffering. And then I saw it. It did not climb out of the box. It didn't need to. It unfolded into the room like a projection made of pain. A flicker did a strobe of wet black movement, like a creature caught between frames of film. A woman did a child did a mouth with teeth where eyes should be. It changed shape constantly, and then it saw me. I don't mean it looked at me. I mean it saw into me. Like every fear I ever buried, every guilty thought, every moment I tried to forget. It fed on them, and then it whispered, "She brought me back, Ruth." My grandmother. She hadn't vanished. She had made the box, or summoned what was inside it. Maybe she thought she could trap it, seal it with melody, but she failed that or worse. Maybe she succeeded. The box was a prison, not for something alive, but for something that never should have heard sound. After that night, I couldn't live in my apartment anymore. The walls had become soft. They moved slightly when I walked by. The outlets oozed a black tar that smelled like fire and salt. I moved in with my cousin 2 towns over. I told him it was just temporary. I didn't bring the box. I sealed it in concrete and dropped it in the river. But I still hear it. The tune, every night, clearer and closer. And when I close my eyes, I see a crank turning in the dark. Not on a box. Inside someone's face. I thought I could end it by drowning the box. But some things don't need air. Some things don't rust. Some things remember where they've been. And they come back A week after I dropped it into the river, sealed in concrete, tied with iron chain, I started bleeding from my ears. Not a lot, just a drop, the same time every night. 3:07 a.m. Then came the knocking. Always from the closet, never loud, just steady, like someone tapping a bone against the door. I moved again, third time in 2 months. My cousin Brian said he woke up one night and saw me standing at the foot of his bed, turning an invisible crank. I don't sleep anymore. Not really do I doze off for minutes at a time and jolt awake drenched in sweat. And always that tune playing faintly beneath the hum of everything, hidden in the refrigerator motor, the radiator, even the ringing in my ears. And then I found a notebook. It arrived in the mail, and a return address. Wrapped in wax paper, smelled like dry rot and copper. The front cover was cracked leather with the initials R.V. pressed into the corner. Ruth Voss, my grandmother. The first page was a letter that in her handwriting that I know because I still have one of her old Christmas cards tucked in a box from when I was 8. The handwriting matched, slanted, thin, controlled. To whoever finds this after me, if you're holding this, it's already too late. It has begun to turn inside you. The box doesn't just play a tune. It extracts sound from what should never be heard. A scream from the pit under all creation. Not hell, not the afterlife. Older. Sound is order. Silence is balance. The box is a mistake, a thing made by accident, and now it calls back what it tried to lock away. The Screamer. The next 40 pages detailed my grandmother's childhood, how she and her twin, Eleanor, received the boxes on their 10th birthday. Gifts from their grandfather, a clockmaker from Hungary who, according to family whispers, spoke languages no one taught him, and who once rebuilt a watch with no moving parts. She described how Eleanor was the first to fall ill, bleeding ears, night terrors, reciting backward melodies in her sleep. Then she began drawing. Drawings of the Screamer. A woman with no jaw and a face like split bark. Hands with too many knuckles. Each time she drew her, the figure was turning more toward the viewer. Ruth buried her box in the woods behind their home. Eleanor never did. And a month later, she walked into the river during a thunderstorm and was found 2 days later, her mouth stitched shut with music wire. Ruth never forgave herself. She thought she could bind the Screamer again. That's what the box was for, a ritual lock hidden as a song. She learned that the melody, if played correctly, forced the entity into stillness. But over time, it leaks. The crank slips. A single wrong note, and it starts over. Over the years, the box passed hands. Each person who wounded it carried the tune further. Each one fed it. The scream grew louder, sharper. By the time I bought it from the Voss estate, it had already unsealed 5 of its 7 turns. And I had finished the 6th. After reading the notebook, I tried to end it the only way I knew how. Fire. I took the pages, the old crank handle, even the recordings Jamie had sent me, all of it, and burned them in a barrel behind an abandoned factory lot. The flame screamed. I don't mean the wood popped. I mean the fire screamed. High and unnatural. Like it didn't want to consume what I fed it. Like it feared it. The smoke curled in unnatural shapes. Faces, mouths, not yelling but open, as if singing. But it didn't stop anything. That night, I woke to find the box sitting in my lap, dripping wet, still sealed in concrete. I tried to break it apart. I rented power tools, a rotary hammer. I chipped the concrete until my hands blistered. But the box, The actual wood box? Not a scratch. I brought it to a metallurgist, paid cash, told him it was an heirloom made of an unknown material. He ran a spectral analysis and said something that haunts me to this day. This thing registers frequencies beyond the range of physical instruments. The grain of the wood has directional anomalies, like it was grown in reverse. I don't think this is wood. I think this was never alive. Not in the way we understand. That's when I found the seventh mark. Underneath the box's winding mechanism, there's a faint etching. I only noticed it after spilling a glass of water on the table. The light hit it just right. It's a symbol, two concentric circles with jagged teeth pointing inward, and a human eye at the center. Ruth described this in her notebook. Said it only appears when the box is almost ready, when the final note is near. She called it the eye of the screamer. The symbol represents the final threshold, when the box is ready to be played all the way through and the screamer can finally pass through fully. Not just as a presence, not as an echo, but as a form. I realized the truth. I wasn't the end of this story. I was just the next player. The screamer wasn't attached to the box. The box was a crutched-out tool. It needed an audience. That night, I set up a live stream. A private one that, no followers, just a closed server. I placed the box on a table and pointed my phone at it. Then I opened the lid and turned the crank. 1, 2, 3, 33. The final turn, the melody began again. But it sounded different. Deeper, slower, more human. It moaned. It wept. I tea-begged in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. The melody felt too complete, as if it had always been inside me. The final note struck, and my vision went black. When I woke, I was in my grandmother's bedroom. Not metaphorically, physically. The wallpaper, the dresser, the photos, all of it, as if I'd been dropped into a frozen piece of time. She was sitting in the corner, older now, pale, hair white as fog. She turned to me and said, "You should have broken your fingers before turning it." And then she smiled, and her jaw snapped downward, unhinging, splitting. Inside was a crank. It began to turn on its own. Faster, faster, the walls peeled back. And the sound was everything. The room peeled like old bark. Grandmother Ruth stared at me, jaw dislocated, mouth yawning wider than it should, revealing a crank turning where her tongue should be. Click, click, click. Every turn unraveled the world around her. The walls twisted inward, drawers snapped open, and her face blurred like a VHS tape left in boiling water. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, even as her skull began to change, elongating, splitting at the seams. She never died, she whispered through the crank. She just went deeper. Who? But I knew I always knew. Eleanor, her twin, the girl who walked into the river but didn't drown. The girl the screamer didn't kill, because she was the first one to finish the tune, and she became its vessel. When the final note plays, the box doesn't close the gate. It opens it wider. All this time, the music wasn't a warning. It was a key, a melody crafted not by any human composer, but by the thing beneath the silence. The thing that existed before music, before time began ticking, before mouths learned to speak. The screamer is not a ghost, not a demon. It is sound that shouldn't exist. Raw meaning with no shape, emotion with no context. A scream that never ends because it was never meant to begin. And we gave it rhythm. We built boxes to hold it. But boxes break. When I woke again, it was morning. Or at least, the sun was up, but the birds weren't singing. No traffic outside. In a wind, in a hum of appliances. Silence. The first I had heard in weeks. Complete. Total. Hollow. I blinked, and the ceiling above me was covered in tiny music notes. Not painted. Carved. Into the plaster. Dozens. Hundreds. The entire ceiling was a stave. A staff of notes. The complete melody from the box. But with one addition. A new mark circled in red ink. One final note that hadn't played. A note outside the human scale. Beneath it was one word, sustain. That's when I realized the screamer wasn't done. I didn't finish the song. I became it. My phone buzzes constantly. Emails, DMs, unmarked voicemails. All the same message. I heard it. The tune from your video. I didn't even click play. It just started. There's something in my closet. I pulled out my own tooth last night. I never made the stream public. I deleted the file. I smashed the phone. But it doesn't matter. Once the final turn completes, the tune exists in the world. Not as a file, not a sound, as a pattern. It embeds in walls, blood, electricity. If you've seen the box, even in an image, it knows you now. If you've heard the tune, even a hum, you've already invited it. And once it gets loud enough, you will finish the song. I found Jamie's apartment. The door was open. Inside, there were no lights. Just walls covered in whiteboard paint, filled with waveforms. Every square inch scrawled in ink. Notes, frequencies, pitches. In the center of the room, his computer played a single, unending loop. The tune, reversed, slowed, 900x. You could barely hear it, but it was there, a guttural sobbing, like a woman crying through a throat filled with ash. On the wall behind his desk, a message was painted in blood. The box is not the source. It's a speaker. Jamie had cut out his own tongue, and underneath it, the box sat open, no longer screeching, just humming, not in a dream, not as a hallucination. She came through the door. No knock, no presence, just. One moment the room was empty. The next, she was standing beside me. 7 feet tall, skin as gray as drowned stone. Her face ever shifting, a woman, a child, a skull, a broken gramophone. All at once, and in her chest, a hollow cavity spinning with a music box crank. She opened her mouth, and instead of sound, my voice came out. She spoke with me. Every word I'd ever whispered, screamed, begged, sang, layered over each other. I tried to run, but I didn't move, because my feet were cranked into the floor, wound down like springs. She leaned in and whispered into my ear, "You are the echo now. Others will listen. Others will turn." I don't know how long I've been writing. Sometimes the words aren't mine. Sometimes I find myself scribbling in a language that looks like shapes made of screams. I've forgotten my name, but I remember the tune. I hum it under my breath. I don't mean to. It's in my pulse. My joints crack to the rhythm of it. My knees buckle in time with the final note. I can hear it now. So can you. Because it's not a song anymore. It's a signal. It's moving through me to you. Do not seek the box. Do not listen to the tune. Do not rewind the sound. Do not try to replicate it. Because the screamer isn't tied to a melody. The melody is how she breathes. And now that it's complete, she is loose, in static, in the background hum of your fridge. In the tune you can't stop humming, but don't know where you heard. In the gap between YouTube, autoplay, and silence. That moment when you think you hear someone whispering behind you. That's her, turning the crank.